Greetings, my name is Olga, and I would like to invite you to visit one of the oldest public buildings in Moscow. This building is called the Chambers of the Old English Court, and it was built at the very beginning of the 16th century. Let's go inside. The history of this building goes back over 500 years. It has been rebuilt many times during that period. The oldest part of the building is its cellar, called a podklat, made of white stone. These walls in the podklat date back to the first owner and builder of this house, Ivan Bobryshev. Let's go inside. The podklat was mainly used for storing food items, which were stored in barrels, bags, and boxes that are large quantities for sale, because the owners of this house were primarily merchants. So why did they store such goods in this cellar? Because the walls here are almost 2.5 to 3 meters thick, approximately 8-9 feet, and it was a safe place. Such cellars were sometimes used as shelters during raids or fires. A tragic example of such took place in 1571. Moscow was attacked by the Crimean Tatars. They did not manage to take over the city, but a monstrous fire started during the siege. It was a very hot and windy day, so the fire spread across the city instantly. The English merchants took refuge from the fire in the building's basements. When it was all done, the fire had burned out and the Tatars had left. People got out of 2 of the basements on their own, but no one emerged from the 3rd basement. It turned out that people simply suffocated from the smoke while sitting in one of the basements. This podklat was mainly used to store goods. The goods were stored not in refrigerators, on plates and bags, or on dishes, but in barrels, bags, and boxes. The whole floor could be packed with goods, all the way up to the ceiling. The most fragile goods could be stored in nooks like this, called pechuras. Such floors were also sometimes used as shelters in case an attack of fire. By the middle 16th century, the building had ended up in the state treasury, and in 1556, Tsar Ivan the Terrible transferred the house to the English. What were the English doing in Russia? They were looking for a northern passage that would lead them to such exotic countries as India and China. In the middle of the 16th century, they opted not to go south or west, but to take their ships from England northeast. As a result, they reached first the Barents Sea and then the White Sea, and found themselves on the northern shores of Russia at the mouth of the northern Dwina River. So they found themselves not in India or China, but in Russia, also a very interesting and rich country. This marked the beginning of regular trade and diplomatic relations between the two countries. Ivan the Terrible awarded several noteworthy privileges to the English, including these stone chambers with a large courtyard. The mutual interest between Russia and England was primarily motivated by trade. Here, on the white stone ground floor, we can see English and Russian goods. Let's talk about Russian goods. What did the English buy in Russia? Mostly 2 types of goods: ship timber and hemp ropes. Russian ropes were considered some of the best, as they did not rot or break for a long time. The English also bought leather and furs in Russia, but furs were extremely expensive, so this was a relatively rare luxury for the English merchants. Another very interesting item is mica, a natural mineral that people used instead of glass. Of course, the English were very interested in wax. They purchased wax in Russia in fairly large quantities: honey, caviar, grain, wheat. And what did Russians buy from the English? Let's move on to English goods. The English brought various goods to Russia, but above all, Russia was interested in weapons, ammunition, and metals. An interesting historical fact: both the Polish king and the Swedish king demanded from the English to stop supplying weapons to Russia. However, all credit to the English queen for dodging the issue by writing that she was only selling old weapons, or that was not selling anything at all. After all, she was first and foremost pursuing her own trading interests. So what were those weapons, ammunition, and metals? Muskets, carbines, swords, rapiers, halberds, Cabasa helmets, gunpowder, and saltpeter. The metals included copper, tin, and lead, which, once delivered to Russia, were used to make bronze. The bronze was then used to make gun barrels. Another famous English product Russia imported was woolen fabric, or English cloth. Here we can see a dark blue piece of cloth. But according to the trade inventories, Russia purchased a lot of sky blue azure woolen fabric. The English also supplied Russia with such luxurious goods as paper, sugar, and wine. In front of you, there is a model of an English merchant's galleon. It was on such a ship that the English arrived in Russia in the middle of the 16th century. The ship was not very large. It was 5 to 6 meters wide and 35 meters long. And not imagine that a ship of this size needed to accommodate a crew of 20 or 40 people along with goods, fresh water, food, weapons, and ammunition. It was quite cramped and uncomfortable. People slept in common rooms, and only one person had separate quarters. That person was obviously the captain. From the once cold and gloomy basements, we climbed to the main floor, which houses the treasury and cooking chamber. The treasury was used to store money, and the cooking chamber was where people ate every day. But the most interesting room, which is unfortunately closed to the public, is the attic. The attic was once used to store non-edible goods. Unfortunately, it could not be restored to its 16th, 17th century appearance. We can only see the door through which all the heavy goods were once loaded. The chambers of the English court have only 3 floors. The first floor is occupied by the white stone pot-clad cellars, one of which we have visited that were used to store grocery goods. The main floor has only 2 rooms, the treasury and the cooking chamber. The treasury was used to store money, and the cooking chamber was where the English ate every day. The third floor is occupied by the attic space, which, just as the basements, was used to store goods, but non-food items. The goods were lifted to the attic through a huge door using a simple lifting device, which sadly has not survived to this day. Here we see a portrait of Ivan the Terrible. It was this ruler who handed the building over to the English in the middle of the 16th century. During the reign of Ivan the Terrible, England had several monarchs replace each other. The expedition to the north was sent by the young 16-year-old King Edward, who lived for a very short time and never learned that the English had found a way to Russia. After he died, the country was ruled by his sisters, first Queen Mary and then Queen Elizabeth I. It was during the reign of Elizabeth I and Ivan the Terrible that the Russian-English relations flourished. The Russian Tsar even considered proposing marriage to the English queen. And now we will visit the building's ceremonial chamber, the treasury. The treasury was used to store the most valuable things. See the powerful door that leads to the treasury. If you want to keep your money safe, you need very thick locks and doors. The main purpose of the treasury was to store money and valuables. In the days of the English, the treasury was kept in such premises. The treasury is a very broad term. It meant not only money, but also furs, expensive goods, and jewelry. That is, everything that had a high value. The second purpose of the treasury was to host important official meetings, feasts, and dinners, but it was not used as a dining room. This role was reserved for the kitchen. Only very important guests were invited to the treasury. Its main decoration was the Grand Russian stove. The English owned this building for almost 100 years, but in the middle of the 17th century, Russia and England unexpectedly severed their relations, and the English were deprived of this court. So what happened? At that time, Russia was ruled by Tsar Alexis I, and England was ruled by King Charles I. In the 1740s, there was a revolution and civil war in England, during which Charles I was executed. Upon learning of this, Tsar Alexis deprived the English of all the gifts and privileges granted by Tsar Ivan the Terrible and forbade them to come to Russia on pain of death. Russian-English relations were resumed 11 years later, when the son of the murdered king was returned to England and made king. However, none of the gifts were returned. We do not know how the English used this room and what it was called during their time here. The name kitchen appears only in in the documents from the second half of the 17th century, when Boyar Miloslavsky owned the building. After the English were expelled from Russia, the building was sold to a relative of Tsar Alexis, the first Boyar Ivan Miloslavsky, who turned this room into a kitchen. But the English most likely used this room as a dining space. People ate here. Unfortunately, the original furnishings were not preserved, and almost everything we see here is a high-quality reconstruction from the 21st century. In 1720, during Peter the Great, the building housed a mathematical school, one of the first in Moscow and in Russia. So this building could easily be called not a chambers of the Old English court, but a mathematical school. During that period, the former cooking chamber and treasury were turned into classrooms where children studied mathematical sciences. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the building passed from the owner to another, and each new owner broke, altered, and rebuilt something. In the second half of the 19th century, the house was rebuilt beyond recognition. It was built into a mansion to be let out on a commercial basis. In the middle of the 20th century, famous architect Pyotr Baranovsky studied the 19th century mansion and its cellars and found out that the mansion wall contained the more ancient walls of the 16th, 17th century chambers. From 1968 to 1972, the old building was restored. The museum opened in October 1994. Queen Elizabeth II of England attended the opening.